What is up, my crew? Welcome to the Nook Podcast. My name is Stephen Murphy. For today's episode, I feel the need to give some context, at least a little backstory. I have worked full-time in Christian ministry for the last 16 years, first in churches in Arizona and South Carolina, and now for a nonprofit Christian relief ministry in Missouri. And let me state as clearly as I can, I love God's church. I believe that we are becoming what Jesus intended. It's just a very slow and at times painful process. So while I have been in this for a while now and have no plans to leave it, I have also dealt with some struggles along the way. I mention all that as a means of introducing you to my guest for this episode. Brandy Verner also comes from a background in ministry and, like me, dealt with a great deal of adversity along the way. But rather than running away when it would have been easy to do so, she has started a ministry that is strictly for those who have dealt with various hardships while in ministry, helping those who have been run over to be restored. If you have ever worked or volunteered in ministry, I really think you'll appreciate this conversation. And if it sounds like something you're not even familiar with, I invite you to listen in, if only to give you insight and appreciation for those who do work behind the curtain where you go to church. So settle in for my discussion with Brandy Verner. Give me the name of your ministry and then give me just a little bit of the background on how things got started.
Sure. Yeah. So the name of the ministry is Resilient Faith Project. And the way it got started is actually kind of through a long story that I will tell quickly here. But a few years ago, my husband and I, with our two kids, were serving overseas as missionaries, and life very quickly, kind of all at one time, began to fall apart. And we were having some financial issues with support. And then my husband went through a health crisis. And just a lot of things were just kind of rocking our world. We just were struggling so much. And then kind of the clincher was when our daughter, who was 12 at the time, had been suffering through some pretty debilitating depression since we had moved to where we were. We were located in Florence, Italy. And she came to us and kind of confessed that she had become suicidal. And so we later found out that she had tried to drown herself in our bathtub. But we were pretty rocked by that whole experience and just desperately trying to figure out, Lord, what do we do with this? Because we felt like we heard your call. We wanted to serve the Lord. We were so passionate. We had kind of prepared for a very long time, about 7 years to actually get to the field. And within a year, things just kind of started unraveling. And so seeking the Lord, getting advice, trying to hear from wise, godly counsel. And we just felt the Lord say, go home and take care of your family. And so we made the really difficult decision to move back to the States to try to get our daughter the help that she desperately needed. And in that process, it was just almost this undoing for me personally, just this identity that I had kind of embraced for so long as a missionary, as a servant, and just having God deconstruct that, so to speak, and bring me through a journey of healing over the few years that kind of followed. And so that process and me getting the healing, getting the restoration, seeing God just reestablish my faith in such an amazing way, I just felt like there needed to be something like the ministry that we've kind of created with the Resilient Faith Project, because there was nothing like that when we moved back. We were looking for it and couldn't find it. And so that is kind of the short story of how we came to be.
Okay. Well, if I can back you up there just a little bit, I'm as a father of two myself, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes to have your 12-year-old come to you with such a heavy story. I mean, that must have, you said it rocked your world, but can you explain a little bit more of just how that moment must just hang in the air for you?
Sure. Yeah. I think, I don't know if you've heard the term mom guilt.
Oh, yeah.
Well, missionary mom guilt is like the extreme of mom guilt, because here, you're trying to be faithful in what God's called you to do, but it very often has impact in your family and on your children. And to see our daughter struggle so much, so desperately, and to feel very ill-equipped to do anything about that, and it sent us into kind of a spiral of asking questions. Lord, if you knew this was going to happen, why did you tell us to come here? Why did you allow us to walk down this path? Because we knew just from how God supernaturally opened doors that we were supposed to go overseas. He made it very clear when it was time to go to do that. And so we walked through the doors that he opened. And then to see kind of the fallout of our obedience, we think, oh, I'm following God, I've heard his voice so clearly, then things are just supposed to fall in place and he's going to take care of us. And I think the danger in that mindset is that God is much more concerned with our own relationship with him, with our own becoming more like Jesus than he is about our comfort. And so we very much experience kind of a stripping away of that comfort that, we all want. We all want to experience being comfortable. And we think, oh, if I'm following God, I'm obeying God, then I'm going to be comfortable. But often that is not the case.
Yeah, you definitely live that.
Yeah.
So in a moment like that, when you realize that there's no way that you can just wait for that to make itself better, and you knew that there had to be drastic change, did you question God? I mean, I can only imagine the doubts that you must have literally about everything at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it literally rocked our world. We jokingly say we came back broken. We had sold everything we owned to move overseas. So we were coming back, no jobs, no house, no cars, literally nothing. And so, yeah, it rocked me in a way that I questioned everything about God's goodness, about his faithfulness. And then I would question, did I really hear from God? Did, maybe he was trying to keep us from going down this path and we just ignored the signs. But like I said before, he had made it so clear. And so over the last few years, I have come to see how God was directing us and guiding us and how he had a plan. But in those moments, I could not see the plan. All I could see is my family is hurting. My husband and I's marriage is falling apart. We're struggling. My daughter is going through all of these hard things. And crying out, Lord, I thought that you loved me and I thought that you loved my family, and I don't feel your love right now.
So how many years has it been how long are you back in the U.S.? How's that?
So we've been back just about 5 years now. So, the first few years were pretty rocky. And thankfully, I found kind of in the process of me trying to wrestle with this, thing that had happened, I started kind of looking, okay, how can I reclaim my identity as this missionary or this person in ministry, the servant of the Lord, because I had wrapped up my identity so tightly with what I was accomplishing or what I was doing. And I think a lot of us, in ministry fall into that trap. And so I started looking for missions opportunities in my area, and I stumbled across a ministry that is about an hour from my house called Beauty for Ashes. And it's a women's ministry doing work around the world. But through that ministry, I was able to have space to kind of tell my story and how it had impacted me and be really open and honest about how I was feeling, but then also hear from the Lord about what it was that he was doing, what his plan was. And so through a couple of years of kind of going through that process with him, the Lord just began to make it really clear that this had been his plan all along, and that I thought it was to go to Italy and plant churches. And God had a bigger plan that I had no idea about. And that was just one step. And so, with Beauty for Ashes, which is an amazing ministry, one thing we hear a lot, though, is, hey, is there Beauty for Ashes for men? Because this is great and women are getting healing. But in the meantime, my husband was still struggling. He was angry with God and has been on his own journey. And there was nothing that I could find that was available for couples like us or families to go through. And so that's when I began to feel like the Lord was saying, you need to create something that people can come to, where they can find community, they can connect with the Lord deeply, and they can rediscover their true identity that has nothing to do with what we are accomplishing for the Lord.
That's awesome. And like I had shared with you when we spoke the other day, that I can absolutely relate. One of the reasons that I got into counseling a few years back was one of the big chunks of that pie was just ministry fatigue. And it's something that I've seen a lot of people go through. And I mean, what I told my counselor countless times was, just the thought of regretting going pro. That I was actually a much happier person when I was just a youth volunteer, and I could show up for the youth group meetings and help them organize and herd the cats to the events and stuff like that. But finding myself in the thing full time for years and for many years now, that you start to get that guilt. I think you touched on something. Yes, mom guilt is definitely its own category, but I think ministry guilt has also got its own gravity, in that there's that constant nagging of, well, yes, I'm doing a lot, but it's for the Lord. It's for the Lord. So I'm sorry I have to miss that family function. I have a thing for the Lord. We can get the thing flipped over. And like you said, get so tied up in what we do for God, forgetting the fact that we're not taking care of ourselves and not taking care of our families. And sadly, how often the family pays a price for that. I'm really passionate about seeing people who are serving, doing it well, because God never intended for us to live in such a way that we are neglecting our own spiritual growth, that we are neglecting our families. I just don't believe that that is God's plan. And so he wants us to serve him, not because we necessarily bring anything amazing to the Lord. I mean, he's God. He can do anything on his own. He doesn't need us, but he invites us into partnership with him. And I'm so glad that he does that, but also he wants to do it in a way that is healthy for us as well, that we don't have to just like sacrifice ourselves and our families on the altar of ministry, that there is a way to do this in a way that it comes out of overflow and abundance, based on love for the Lord and not
guilt or this feeling that I need to do this because God needs me to show up.
Yeah, that odd sense of self-obligation that I think we can quickly assign to ourselves. And I think that that's when things do
Right.
definitely get off track. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting to me
Yeah.
that you have essentially gone from a missionary to running a rescue mission. I love that you're available to help people in ministry work through those things, because one of the saddest stories that I think that I hear is somebody who used to be in ministry and isn't
Yeah.
any longer, especially when it's come out of a place of burnout or hurt or anything that you can assign, towards the negative side of the spectrum. That
Yeah.
it sounds to me like you've got a wonderful thing in place there to say, no, hold on. Let's help you right the ship.
Yeah. I mean, because I don't want people to be former ministers or former missionaries or former church staff. I want people to be able to serve for the long haul. That's kind of the goal. Is how can we give people a firm foundation? How can we help them seek God in such a way that it is out of overflow and not just out of obligation? And, we're still getting started and we're figuring out what that looks like. But I've had the privilege over the last several years as I've worked with Beauty for Ashes. I've done kind of ministry all over the world, and I've worked with leaders. I kind of pre-COVID, I trained leaders for an international missions organization. So I've had the opportunity to see a lot of people in a lot of different settings. And, I've seen people that have served out of burnout, and then I've seen people who have served out of overflow, and it makes all the difference in the world. And personally, in my own life, I've done both of those things. And I think the Lord has given me kind of a unique perspective in that I have done church in a lot of ways. I've been in ministry in a lot of different capacities, church staffs, in several different denominations, and then serving overseas, and then working in a parachurch ministry. So I've kind of seen all of the different dimensions of how you can do ministry. And it's the same in every place, that people are pushing themselves. Environments are not being created in such a way that there is a healthy balance for family and ministry. There's not the opportunity or the expectation that people are going to be authentic about how they're feeling.
Yeah.
They don't feel like they have a space where they can do that. And so that's one thing that we want to create with Resilient Faith Project, is space for people to be authentic about the struggles that they're experiencing, the challenges they're facing, the questions that they're asking, because they're asking the questions and they're struggling, especially in this COVID time that we find ourselves in. A lot of people in ministry are struggling. And so we want to make space for that.
I just can't tell you how much I appreciate what you're doing. Just having worked in the church world from the media production side for all of my church career, and working at some big churches, they were wonderful opportunities.
Yeah.
But it just seems like one project becomes another 10 projects, and on and on and on, as we have tried to keep pace with modernity, in that we want good stories being told, and we want good visuals on our screens. And it was wonderful to be a part of those things. But I can look back now and also see times where I was working from such an empty place, because there was always somebody above me asking me, what are you doing? But there was rarely somebody above me asking, how are you doing? And that to me was a really,
that's so good.
That was a big missing piece for me. And while I realized that as a believer in Christ, I'm responsible for self-feeding, for being in Scripture, for having my quiet time, trying to maintain my relationship with God. But even in that, I also realized my need for pastorship, for leadership, for mentorship. And I think that ministry just has a tendency to become its own snowball. Really, even you mentioned all the various aspects that you've worked in, big and small. I think eventually they all start to find that rhythm where, left unattended, you will get you'll either have to try to keep up with the machine, or the machine will run you over. And
right.
I love that you're building this thing to where people can pull away from that, if only for a moment, to say, I can't live in that craziness, or something's going to fail.
Yeah.
And that's the part where I'm, where I kind of get the most heartbroken, where having networked with church media guys all over the country, and you hear that same story over and over and over again. And I think the church has paid a price there. And I see churches that are still looking for a new video guy, or still looking for a new sound guy. And I think that, granted, that's the world I lived in, but I see the same thing for children's pastors, for youth pastors, that, there's only so much blood you can squeeze from the turnip.
Right.
That we have to take better care of our own. That's the end of my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. My husband and I worked at a mega church together in Atlanta. And you talked about the monster, and we used to use that term that, because before we came on staff, we loved our church, and it was a great church. It's nothing against the church, but the curtain was pulled aside, so to speak, with Oz, the guy behind the curtain, it's kind of like you see the mechanism. And we used to talk about, we have to feed the monster. And there was lip service, I think, given to making sure that you're resting, and you're making sure you're taking care of your families. But I didn't see it as much in the actual implementation of, okay, how do we do that?
Yes.
How do we pull away from our responsibilities and our things? I mentioned to you when we spoke before, my husband is an audiovisual guy as well. And so he was a lighting designer. So there were many weeks we would be doing conferences. We have Jesus Culture come and does a conference. And then we would go right into 4 services for the weekend with no break. And it's just, how can we create environments? How can we reduce the expectation in some ways of what we are expected to bring and produce and do, so that we can allow our staff and our workers to minister to their families, to take care of their own soul care, and not just always be creating opportunities for others to meet with the Lord. Yeah.
Oh, the reason I laughed so hard there was that for years I've joked, if I wrote a book about my time working in churches, the title would be Behind the Curtain. And it's not to paint some horrible picture of debauchery or underhanded things. It's really not. I worked for some amazing people, but it's just, it's that grind, and how everything does look so different from behind that curtain, and the inevitable taxes on your mentality and on your own beliefs, really, that really take a hit in those high output, high stress. I literally have to be there every time the doors open.
Right. Yeah, and it does take a toll. And so one thing that is kind of a future vision for Resilient Faith Project is to provide training for churches and for ministry staff who are trying to lead their people well, their leaders well, is how do you create an environment that allows people to meet with the Lord personally? How do you create an environment that allows for people to be vulnerable about the things that are, they're struggling with, maybe the questions that they're having? Because I feel like that is something that we, kind of talk about in a sense that we know that it's something that we should do, but so many churches are not doing it well, and not just churches, but also missions organizations. We've experienced that as well. It's like, I love what you said before about people would ask, oh, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But not how are you doing?
Yep.
Or if they're asking the how, they don't really want the true answer to that.
Exactly.
They want to think everything is fine because then I don't have to play in the mess.
Yes. Oh, it's like my boss didn't want to know how often I was at the church till midnight on Thursday,
right?
Just to hold on to my Friday day off, because we had a service Saturday and 3 services on Sunday.
Yep, that's exactly how our church was.
That one Friday, that was my, I've got a 24-hour reprieve here. That it's like how hard you have to beat yourself up to hang on to it. Oh, and for that matter, since like a Monday holiday, like Labor Day, I hated it because I was already cramming 5 days of work into 4. Now you've taken my Monday from me, and now I'm cramming 5 days of work into 3. And everybody, hey, we get a 3-day weekend. No, 3-day weekends don't exist in ministry.
Exactly.
What do you see this? I mean, you've mentioned that you're still building something here. What do you see moving forward for this so vital ministry that you're in now?
Yeah. So kind of just to give a little bit of framework. So for Resilient Faith Project, we have 3 keys that we really kind of focus in on. These are the things that just in my own life, the Lord really identified as the 3 things that help me kind of move from that place of brokenness and burnout to a place where I was able to thrive and continue to serve in ministry, and do that out of overflow and not just out of this obligation or sense of this is what I'm supposed to do. And so those 3 keys are connecting deeply with the Lord. The second one is understanding our identity in Christ. And the third one is engaging in authentic community. And so everything that Resilient Faith Project is doing and will do kind of revolves around one or more of those things. And so right now, we really have been taking time to develop community. And so we have a Facebook group right now where we are engaging with people, that they can come and kind of be in a space where there are people who understand what they're going through, who are, in similar roles, and we can pose questions and ask about like, how is your soul? What are you doing to take care of yourself? What time are you spending with the Lord that is not for prep for ministry? Because that's, I think, a thing that a lot of us fall into is like all the time that we're spending maybe in God's word or prayer, it all has to do with what am I producing, instead of how am I just connecting with God because I just love him and I want to spend time with him and he wants to spend time with me. So that is kind of the base for the community, but we're getting ready to start doing monthly meetups online where we have calls that people can come and enter in. We're in the process of launching a podcast where people can begin to engage, and we'll give practical tips about how do you engage with the Lord. Like when you're just at a place where you don't want to read your Bible, you don't want to pray, you just like, it's just as much as you can do to get through the day, serving and doing what you have to do. How do you then go back? And so we're going to be talking about those types of things, but also providing resources and recommending things that people can interact with. And then eventually we see hosting workshops and retreats where people can maybe come and get away, where they have space to be authentic about what they're struggling with, to meet with other people who are in similar positions. Because so many leaders don't feel like they have any space to do that. They don't have a safe place. They don't feel like they can share with their pastor or their church staff or even their friends and family because they're doing the Lord's work. And so how do we make space? So those are the types of things that we are doing and will continue to expand.
Yeah. And you touch on something there that I guess I wonder sometimes, what does a non-ministry worker, how are we viewed And I think that that's that added pressure that we have to put on that good face because we have to look like we've got it all together. We work at such and such a church or such and such a church ministry. How in the world could you deal with rough things? But I think people forget we're people just like you.
Right. Well, and I think we have created a culture that says that in our churches and in our ministries. But I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to the people that we lead because those people are struggling just like we are. Their struggles may be slightly different and they may not be serving in ministry, but they're having tragedies happen. They're struggling maybe with their marriage or finances or a child who is ill. And so when we pretend that we have it all together, that we believe God's so faithful, we never doubt him, we never ask questions, then we don't make room for those people to do the same. And they are questioning, they are doubting just like we are. Mm-hmm. And so we do them a disservice, but we also do us a disservice because we don't allow space. And then that's when so many people just get completely burned out. They're frightened to walk away from ministry and sometimes even from the Lord totally, which is just heartbreaking to me.
Yeah. I mean, not that anybody walking away from their faith is okay with me on any level, but how sad is it when somebody who, like you, felt that call, was quite confident in that call, and then just had your world rocked. And then, there might be friends or even family members for you who saw you, watched you go through that, and would say, if you walked away from all that faith mess after that, I totally get it. That we would ever be so bruised or broken in the ministry process that you throw your hands up and say, I'm out. That'll never sit right with me.
Yeah. And I think the enemy has a field day with that, right? Like,
oh, sure.
That's exactly what he wants, is for us to not feel like we can share, not feel like we can be honest, keep the doubts and the fears and the struggle secret, because he can have a field day in that secrecy. But if we can bring those things into the light, if we can share openly and vulnerably, then other people are going to feel like, okay, wow, maybe I can share about how I'm struggling. And in those shared struggles, that is where God is able to encourage us and bring truth and light. And so then things begin to get better instead of just, like you said before, snowballing to the point where you're just walk away.
Yeah, because you've got to get to a point where you can get rid of all that mess to where you can even begin to heal from all those things that want to tear you up. Would you then, if you were to kind of look back over the last 5 to 7 years and everything that it's brought you to this place where you are now, would you change any of it, knowing what you know now?
I think that's a really good question. It's one I've kind of wrestled with. And if you had asked me that a year ago or 2 years ago, I might have given a different answer. But as the Lord has healed my heart, as he has established kind of this foundation of faith in me, I would not change, because I see now how the Lord's plan was so much further than what I saw. All I saw was go to the field, serve, and that's God's will. But the Lord revealed to me that his will was to get me to a point where I can trust fully in him, that I can believe that what he says is true, that his word is true, that I am more like Jesus than I have ever been. And I still have a long way to go, but I would not trade that intimacy, that trust, that faith, unshakable faith that God has given me through this process. I would not trade it for anything. Now, would I make some different decisions? Maybe, but I would still go. I would still walk this out, because in the long run, it has been completely life-changing.
Mm.
And I believe that God's ultimate purpose was Resilient Faith Project, but he just had to take me to Italy to get that in my heart. And so, yeah, I would absolutely do it again.
So is it fair to say then that you have seen redemption in your marriage and with your kids and all those things that seem to be completely out of your control a few years back, comparing then to now?
Oh, man. Yeah, incredibly. Honestly, God kind of showed me recently. My husband and I, our marriage was shaky before we went to the field, if I'm quite honest with you. Like we had some things that we had needed to deal with for a really long time. And I had been praying for years for God to move in this situation, to change our hearts, to knit us together. I never thought that it would take us being failed missionaries, and I use that term kind of in quotations, failed missionaries, to get to that point. But the way that he's brought restoration to our relationship, it is better than it's ever been. The way that my children have received healing and my daughter has gotten the help that she needs. Now, is everything magically okay? No. There are still things that we're working towards and still ways that we're growing and learning, and God is still continuing to heal layers. But our family is so much healthier and stronger than it ever was before. But it took that deconstructing, it took that breaking process for us to get to a point. Because before it was all about us and how, we could do things in our own strength, and we got to a point where we couldn't rely on ourselves. We only could rely on Jesus. And he showed up just like he always does. And so I'm so thankful that he did it, even though at the time it was really painful and really hard.
So how would you measure your trust in Jesus now compared to then?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think if God told me to do something now, it would be a completely different experience, because before, and even in the process of starting Resilient Faith Project and walking that out, I've already seen that. Before, it was all about me figuring out, how is this going to be accomplished? How am I going to do this? Okay, the Lord gave me this vision. He gave me this dream, and then now I have to do it. And this has been a very different process for me, in that this is the Lord's vision, and he has shared it with me and he's entrusted it to me. But I'm just every day like, okay, Lord, what do we do next? And he continues to show up and he continues to speak. And it doesn't always look the way that I thought it would, but it has been so much more enjoyable and less stressful than anything before, because it is completely in his hands. I don't have responsibility except to do what God has told me to do on a daily basis. And so every day I show up. What are we doing today, Lord? And just continue to be faithful in that. And I'm holding it so much more loosely than I ever did before. Before, it was just like this dream, this vision that's mine, that God gave me, but now it's mine. And I'm clinging desperately and trying to force it into existence. Yeah. And now it's just an open thing, like, okay, Lord, as long as you want me to do this, I will do this. And then when you say it's time to do something else, then we'll do something else. And I'm completely okay with that.
That's awesome. Brandy, I am so glad that I got to hear about this. And that's, I say that completely aside from what we've gotten to talk about today. Because I feel like I'm just kind of in a repeat cycle of just knowing how many people that I've known that have kind of gotten chewed up and spit out, sadly. And even for my own time, that I 2-3 years ago, that I was just in a really dark place because of that same kind of stuff where it's just like I'm constantly putting out. And something you said a little bit ago really struck a chord with me too. And it's just like, I didn't even want to read my Bible, because if I'm reading my Bible, it's because I'm trying to come up with cool branding for a series on Philippians. And it's not just me connecting with the word and saying, God, feed me here today, speak to me here today. No, I'm in there trying to find a cool visual. And it's my job to read the Bible. And it took me a couple of years to just get back to where it's like, again, I'm finally back in a place where it's like, oh, I love reading God's word. I have to have that every morning, or I feel off.
Yeah.
You know, it's like skipping breakfast if I don't have my time in the word in the morning. So I love what you're doing. I speak a blessing over what you are doing to.
Oh, thank you so much.
Let that thing flourish. I love that you're following him with the trust that you speak of. And I hope that doesn't just sound like, church speak
not at
to
all.
you. Because I think that there's definitely there is a group of people out there that need that healing, that need that reconnection.
Yeah.
And I hope they find it with what you're doing.
I loved what you're doing with the podcast, and just thanks for giving me a place to tell our story. And it's been a pleasure.
As one who is neck deep in the world of ministry, I so appreciate that Brandy has such a heart for the people doing this important work. We are people too, and we are susceptible to the garbage in this life just like everybody else. If I may take just a moment and speak to those who work in any kind of ministry, what you do is so important. You have immeasurable value in God's kingdom. You are a child of God. Nothing can change that. Do not buy into the lie that you are isolated or alone. I pray that you are working from a place of fullness and not a deficit. If you need some encouragement, I'd love for you to get connected with Brandy and the Resilient Faith Project. I've got all the important links down in the show notes. My email address is there as well. I'm always open to your feedback. If you know someone who works for a church or other kind of ministry, please let them know how much you appreciate what they do, and maybe send them a link to this episode. I'd love to connect with them and make sure that they feel encouraged. Thank you so much again for listening, and I will catch you here next time in the Nook. The Nook is a production of Sozo Digital Media.